Hey everybody, this is Mike Van Meter, and welcome to Recovery is Possible. And this is the podcast where we talk about mental health, addiction, and all the things that are out there to help you become the best person that you possibly can. And today, this next guest has been on the show before, Mark Pfetzer, and I had met him way back when I was teaching at the FBI Academy and teaching at the National Academy, and I was teaching a course called Leading at-Risk Employees, and we had connected. And when I traveled out to New Mexico and did a presentation for Mark with an organization that he has out there. And for those of you that listen to the podcast, you may remember a little more than a year ago, Mark was going to work with several other individuals and go on a boat ride, like a rowing boat ride across the Atlantic Ocean to bring awareness to a nonprofit and an issue that he's a part of, and that's Guardian Initiatives, and Mark's going to talk to you all about it. Now, back then, we were talking about how Mark and his team were getting ready for this boat ride, and then he also did another episode where he was talking about the initiatives that he's a part of. But today, I'd like to talk about what the result of that was, because Mark and I had talked offline about that trip and journey, and it was quite the journey indeed, and he's going to tell you all about it. And then, of course, he's going to talk to you about mental health and Guardian Initiatives. So with that, Mark, welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Well, tell us, first of all, tell us a little bit, just to remind people, or if they haven't listened to that episode, what Guardian Initiatives is, why you were doing it, what you guys set out to do, and then finally we'll get into how that turned out.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's great. So as you know, Mike, I'm retired law enforcement, retired now, actually. Last time we spoke, I wasn't retired, but I'm retired now. But did 23 years in law enforcement, and myself and one of my coworkers and good friends, Jared Slindy, the two of us, we started a nonprofit. The nonprofit was called Guardian Initiatives, and we live in the Four Corners area, so that's northwest New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, and Colorado. And so we started this nonprofit for our first responder community, and beyond just law enforcement. Even though he and I are both law enforcement, it went beyond law enforcement to fire, dispatch, EMS, and even corrections. And we decided to start the nonprofit to help our local community and with four things. That is to bring awareness of the problem of first responder mental wellness. As you know, as I've learned, and I know in prior talks we spoke about this, that for me, I knew there was a problem with first responder mental wellness, but as I really got on this journey with the nonprofit and then the row, really learned how much of a problem, how deep that was, and how oftentimes unprepared we were to handle that. So we wanted to bring awareness of this problem of first responder mental wellness. We wanted to share resources, whether that was treatment facilities or books, podcasts like yours, to things that are out there that can help people. And we found there's a lot of resources too that, or maybe just aren't consolidated in one great place. So we wanted to share resources, help with training, to facilitate training. We're not the trainers ourselves, but we definitely have facilitated training from bringing in, field experts that can come into our area and talk, not just to first responders, but to families. And then also to be able to help with treatment costs. Most first responders, when we think of first responders, many of us, and we consider, we have good insurance in the industry, but there's, you come out west and a lot of other places in the U.S., there's a lot of volunteers, especially in the fire realm, and they may not always have the access to the insurance to pay for treatment. And so we thought it's unacceptable if somebody's not getting treatment or worried about getting treatment because of a financial cost. So we wanted to be able to help with that as well. Now, around the same time that we were developing Guardian, we had this crazy idea to participate in this race called the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. And it was a rowing race across the Atlantic Ocean, started in the Canary Islands, which is kind of off the coast of Africa, and landed in Antigua. It's 3,000 miles, and everybody rows for a cause. And we met an American team, a veteran team that was rowing for veteran suicide and traumatic brain injuries. And, what perfect then to row for first responder mental wellness. So these things kind of came together at the same time. It was really great. And Then we embarked on really a 4-year journey. While the row itself, I talk about it, it took us a little over 51 days to row, but the whole journey took us about 4 years and continues on as, we still have our nonprofit. We're still working to help our, local first responders and help raise that awareness, training and share resources and help with funding. So 4 years, and we've learned a lot along the way, and have been, I'll say it on the road, but in case I forget, humbled. We've been humbled a lot along the way, which has been a great experience as well, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I when I went out there to visit you and do that presentation you asked me to do, you took me up to one of the lakes, which is where the boat that you had purchased for the team, and this is like an all-weather, seaworthy type of boat, and you can tell us how big it was. It wasn't real big at all. And I spent 8 years in the Navy. I knew how our ships would get thrown around in the ocean. I just thought to myself, oh my goodness, to be in this thing and go across the Atlantic, that's crazy. And I was just amazed at the commitment to the training that you guys were making and everything that it would take. I mean, just from the fact that somebody would have to be rowing all of the time, and then you guys would have to mix into that the rowing, the eating, the sleeping, which is maybe just a couple hours, maybe even an hour at a stretch. And you can go into that a little bit more. But I was really just amazed at that and all of the planning, and just very impressed with the planning that went into this. Not just the row itself, but on the nonprofit side and the work that you're doing. And so maybe just kind of briefly tell us a little bit about what went into that, because it was a huge endeavor.
It was, like I said, 4 years of a build up to even get to the row. And we wanted it to be successful. We're doing this to raise money. We're doing this to raise awareness. And so we wanted it to be successful. And so we chose to row in a race that was very controlled, for safety purposes, and but also they want to see you succeed. And I remember them telling us early on, like, look, the hardest part is getting to the start line. Everything you have to do to get to the start line. Once you get on the water and start rowing to, from the Canary Islands to Antigua, life gets a little simpler. And there was a lot of truth in that. And so, yeah, you mentioned the boat. The boat was specially designed, and we had to get a special boat built for ocean rowing. We are out in the middle of the ocean by ourselves. We have all of our own provisions on the boat, enough food for 60 days. There were 3 of us, by the way, myself, Jared, and Mike. Mike was a retired sergeant from the sheriff's office. And, as you know, because I think we even hit you up to row with us, we were always looking for a 4th person to row and could never find anybody.
Yeah, and my wife said absolutely not. My wife said absolutely not. So
it just blew our mind why nobody wanted to spend 2 months out with us and row across the ocean. But so there's 3 of us, and we had to get the boat. We had to raise the money to even get the boat. These are not cheap. They're specifically designed for ocean rowing. Like I was saying, we had all of our own provisions on the boat. So we had a desalinator, and we had to train on this boat. We had to have for the race, because again, they're very safety conscious. You had to have a lot of training. So we had to log hours. Of course, the lake where you came out, and I think you even helped us row it across. We had to move the boat one night, and you helped us row it around to a different side, or maybe we even brought it up on the trailer. I don't remember. But we had to go out on the ocean. We trained in England with different trainings we had to do with first aid, sea survival, navigation. Of course, was a big one, and so lots of prep work. But one of the things we really we're adamant we wanted to do with this was we weren't just rowing, we didn't start the nonprofit. We weren't doing all this just to say, this is what we're rowing for. We really wanted to make a difference. We really wanted to have an impact on first responder mental wellness. So immediately, and this made it harder for us, but we were okay with it. Immediately, we started to do work with the nonprofit. As soon as we created it, I think it wasn't but 2 months, we had our first training scheduled for clinicians on learning the cultural component of working with first responders. And so we immediately started working to bring in that training to help share that awareness. And it's a great hey, if you live in New Mexico and haul around an ocean rowing boat to your town and stop at businesses and stop places to eat, lots of people ask what it is. And it's a great opportunity to talk about our endeavor and everybody would ask, why would you be so crazy as to do that? And we would let them know, hey, this is what we're doing it, and this is the cause we're rowing for. So there was a lot of preparation. There was a lot of training that went into it, both preparation mentally to have ourselves ready to endure this, and really anybody who's done extreme sports knows there's only so much mental preparation you can do. There's only so much physical preparation you can do, and you really just got to get out there and be determined. And that was talking on the physical or the mental wellness side, it's something we spoke about as well as a team. That one of the things that really helped us, we had such a supportive community throughout the whole trip, even out in the middle of the ocean. We had some great communications from the ocean because we had satellite phones, and we were able to text. We even had a little I guess it's a little satellite dish we could connect to Wi-Fi if we needed to, and but we were able to talk to home and talk to people at home, and some of that support coming back to us, when we experienced some low times out in the middle of the ocean, which I can talk about, having that support from back home was really great. But and that's why I said the whole trip was humbling. One, the support we got from our community and our friends and our family. The size of the ocean is pretty darn humbling when you're in a 26-foot rowboat that's only about 5.5 feet wide. And, surprisingly enough, how bad of rowers we were was also humbling. When we went in feeling pretty good.
Like I told you, I was a Navy guy, and that's being on Navy ships. And I remember being on a Navy ship, just thinking to myself, wow, we are pretty small out here. I couldn't even imagine it. And you guys aren't sailors. I mean, you were, police officers, firemen, right? One of you is a fireman, correct? Or no, all three of you were law enforcement, correct?
All three police officers. Yep.
Yeah.
All three police officers.
3 cops on a boat. What could go wrong, right? Well,
that's right.
Well, tell us about that. Okay, so in the first episode, we talked about the build up to this. Okay, so now, if you don't mind, walk us through this. What happened? Tell us the whole process of how this went down.
So to skip the early on stage of what I mentioned, all the training and the acquisition of equipment we had to do, but to actually get out there to the start of the race, again, 4-year build up to get there. And I remember, our boat, we had to have our boat shipped over. I think we shipped our boat in September. The race started December 12th in Antigua, and we shipped our boat in September, and it was still delayed when we got there. It was delayed multiple days. We're standing around, we're watching all these teams getting ready. Most of these teams are coming out of England, so their boats were a lot closer to get shipped and had better logistics. And so we're standing around, we have no equipment, we're hoping our boat's going to finally get here, but it got it. And we were so squared away. We had done so much work prior. It didn't take us long. I think we had our boat turned around in the water within 24 hours that we were ready to we passed all of our inspections that they had to put us through. And then it was just a couple days later, we're watching the weather, and it's a race. So everybody they actually start you about 3 minutes apart to spread you out a little bit. And people ask me, were you ever scared? And I bring this up now, Mike, because the most scared I ever was on the race was the day of the start. And they fired off the cannon for our team to leave. And I was probably 50 yards from the land, rowing out, watching my wife. My wife had come out to the start line, and I'm watching her get, smaller and smaller on the dock as we row away. And that was probably the most scared I ever was, thinking, I really not knowing what I just got us into. As a skipper of the boat, I took a lot of responsibility and took that serious. Even though we're all adults, we all did this willingly. So I was still the captain of the boat, if you will, and took that as a big responsibility. So that was pretty scary, thinking, I hope I know what I just got us into, because then it starts. Now there's 3 of us, and you're right, we rode 24 hours a day. And the way we did that was, depending on the size of your teams, there's 5-person teams a lot of 4-person teams, trios like us. There's pairs. There's even solo rowers, and I'll talk about some of the solo rowers here in a moment. But we would row, and every hour, you'd row for 2 hours and you'd get an hour off. So what that looked like on the boat is somebody's always getting off the oars because we were staggered, and somebody coming on every hour. So you'd take your hour off, but then in the middle of the night, the way we were able to do it is we each rowed solo for 2 hours at night. And that gave us a 4-hour break. And it sounds kind of complicated just talking about it, but it was able to give us a 4-hour break that we were still, somebody was rowing, at least one person, preference 2 people row, but we had at least one person rowing, which was kind of nice. I mean, in the middle of the night, there's something unique about being by yourself on deck in the middle of the night. And, you don't have any lights on unless there's a ship coming towards you, which I can talk about that as well. We had a few of those. So it's pitch black, and there's no ambient light from anywhere. Obviously, you're in the middle of the ocean and just rowing on your own. That was pretty amazing experience to have that and have it every night. But we would row, 2 hours on, you'd have an hour break. Now, during that hour break, you had a lot of stuff to do. Like, you're busy on this boat. You were very task driven, very task oriented, depending on what time of day it was. You got into your routines. For instance, in the middle of the day, because we were running off solar power, at high noon, when the sun was at its highest, is when we would turn on our water maker, our desalinator, because it drew the most power. And so that was about an hour and a half task to make about 30 liters of water every day, or filter about 30 liters of water, because it's just a slow trickle that comes out. Or you've got to eat. Eating is a big thing, as I think we probably talked about before. We brought a lot of food with us. We had to have 4,000 to 5,000 calories per person per day on the boat. Now, we didn't eat that much. Matter of fact, Mike and Jared, they really lost their appetite for a few weeks. And I never lost my appetite. Surprisingly, none of us got sick. We did get sick on a training row, seasick, but none of us got sick on our actual ocean crossing. But they still just lost their appetite. So you still, you had to eat. You had to keep yourself clean. You had to keep your equipment clean. You have a lot of salt water all over you all the time. You're getting splashed. The boat's really low to the water, so you're getting splashed. And then at night is really when you caught that 4 hours is when you got some sleep. On your hour breaks every now and then you'd go in, you'd get some, 30-minute quick little nap. But it was so crazy, Mike, because, and I'm sure you've been in situations, whether the military or law enforcement or even some, extreme sports where you're sleep deprived. And we would be so sleep deprived that you'd go in to your cabin to sleep. There's a small cabin on either end of the boat. You'd go in to take a nap. And you'd fall asleep right away, and you'd wake up and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm late. I'm late to get on the oars. And the guy who's on the oars wants to get off. It's his break. And you turn on the light, because it's normally in the middle of the night. You turn on the light and you start getting all your stuff put back on. You open the door to come out and realize you'd only been down there for 15 minutes and you had 4 hours.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And so the other guy would yell at you like, hey, you still got 15 minutes, or you still got 3 hours, or you still got 3.5 hours. And you were just so disoriented from that sleep deprivation. It was really weird. Now it got better as time went on. You got a little bit more used to it, but you were still really, really tired. And so those were some of those experiences out there that I'm not sure, really hard to get anywhere else. And kind of expensive way to get to a sleep deprivation state, rowing across the ocean, but it was pretty amazing, and there's a lot of stories in between I want to share, but I'll just as overall, it took us 51 days to get to the other side. It was 51 days, 17 hours, and 18 minutes to be exact to cross the ocean and get to Antigua. So 51 days of nonstop rowing like that was our experience.
Well, let me ask you too. Now, the physical breakdown of your body. I mean, we'll talk about sleep deprivation, but I couldn't imagine just saying, "Okay, I'm going to go to the gym for that many hours, and for 51 days, I'm going to do nothing but go on the rowing machine for 51 days. And oh, by the way, not sleep a whole lot, and then being exposed to the sun and all the different, so what did it do to your body? I mean, I just couldn't imagine going to the gym and just doing one thing literally all day, every day for 51 days. What kind of impact did that have on you?
I think the mental side of that repetitiveness and boredom was broken up just because you're so focused, right? You've got a job to do, and there's no other way to get back. There's no other way to get back there's no boat following us that says, oh, are you done? You want us to pick you up? There's nothing like that. I mean, if you truly need a rescue, you're relying on container ships, sailboats. The race had what they called a chase boat, but it was way far in the back, really, and they're just taking pictures of their sailboats. So you were very focused on that. So the mental side, of course, we had our very tough, many of them, tough mental days, and I can explain what caused that. But the physical side, as you're asking, for the most part, we stayed pretty good physically. Of all the muscles, they talk about rowing being a total body workout. Well, I'll tell you what, it's not. It doesn't work your calves. And when you don't walk anywhere, this boat's so small, you jump up, you walk to one end, like maybe 10 feet to one side or one end, or 10 feet to the other end. Not even that much. It's probably 6 feet to one, 6 feet to the other side of where you'd walk. We lost our calves. Your calf muscles kind of just deteriorate to nothing, that atrophy. But Ned, there was more trauma, physical trauma from, I think Jared fell on deck one time and banged his knee up pretty bad. Mike had some shin splint issues from, he was using his, like, you'll want to pull, you want to kind of hook your toes back when your seat's moving back and forth. And he had started giving him shin splints. Me personally, I kept having this issue. So early on when I was rowing, your feet strap in, just like on a rowing machine, right? A Concept 2 rowing machine, your feet are strapped in, and I was starting to get a blister. And so I moved my feet, because you can adjust your feet up and down, and I adjusted my feet up. And then for probably the next 3 weeks, as I was rowing, every now and then a wave would catch your oars, and it would take the end. If you remember the oars, they're about 12 feet long, and they've got about a 2-inch diameter wooden handle on the end of them. While the shaft is carbon fiber, they've got this big wooden handle, and the wave would hit the oar or catch the oar and knock it back into my shins. And it hurt so much. I mean, it's like somebody hitting you with a baseball bat day after day after day. This happened quite often. And finally I realized, because I'm in a brain fog out there, sleep deprivation and such, is I had raised my feet up. Well, that made my shins come up, brought my legs up. So it's like, duh, move your feet back down now that your blisters are gone. So we had small traumas like that. Of course, you get blisters here and there. Your butt gets pretty sore from sitting in that rowing seat for quite a while, every day for many, many hours. But other than that, the physical breakdown wasn't too bad. I mean, it was a good diet plan. I think I lost about 15 pounds. Mike, maybe about 20 or so. Jared, 25, I think, or somewhere around there. And
maybe I should have gone on the trip. That maybe it would have helped out.
It's perfect. It's like when I used to climb in the mountains. I said the same thing. Hey, come to the big mountains and lose a bunch of weight. But, so yeah, it was physically, of course, there's a physical demand on that. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, you're doing all that work day in and day out. You get sore, you get cramps here and there. So it definitely had that physical toll, and the mental toll. Well, I said, you're pretty focused. You still have the stress. There's a lot of stress. For me, there was a lot of stresses out there. I'm pretty high stress anyway. I, worry about things, but being skipper of the boat and also being the one who understood most about the boat, the technical workings of the boat. We had some issues out there. We had some equipment issues, which really stressed me out. Like I would, the little bit of sleep I could get, there was times it kept me awake. And, we had a our water maker, our desalinator, it would not. I had to reset it. Luckily, I knew how to reset it every time because it would not. You couldn't just turn it on. They're designed where you can just turn them on. When you turn it off at a certain point in its cycle, which you hear audibly. It makes a clunk. You turn it off, and we would do that. But then when I went to turn it back on, it would never pressurize. And so I had to manually prime it every time. And we're using this every day. And the concern of if this water maker goes down, we're done. We're out. We will have to get rescued by a cargo ship or something because the emergency backup one is a hand pump and it takes hours to pump a water bottle of water. I'm sure maybe you experienced those in your Navy time of utilizing some of those hand desalinators.
Yeah, I did, but it was for emergencies only. I mean, it's definitely, exactly. If you got to the point where you're using that, you were having a really bad day. Really bad
exactly. Day. We had another issue. With our, the seats are rolling back and forth, and they're on skateboard wheels. And if anybody's ever taken a skateboard or a set of roller blades apart, on the skateboard wheels, there's a ball bearing on either side, or not a ball bearing, but a bearing on either side. And I had purchased these ceramic bearings. Somebody said, yes, put the ceramics in, they're really good. Now, the saltwater environment, as you know, is super corrosive. And we weren't out to sea but a couple days, and one of those bearings, or not one, but multiples of them went bad on the seats. Now, I had spares, but I'm doing the math in my head, okay, 3 bearings in the first 4 days. However many days it's going to take us, we don't have enough bearings to replace these constantly. And so that was a major stress point to me because I had to then keep the ones we had running well and only use spares when we absolutely needed them. But when you need them, there's no way you cannot use them. And I was in my mind thinking, what am I going to do to rig something up that we can, because you need to have that leg power rowing. And so I had in my mind a little plan of this. We had this cutting board. I thought, all right, we had tools on the boat. It's like, well, I can cut some strips of that, nylon cutting board to act as runners, and we could try this. It wouldn't be ideal, but it'd get us across the ocean. Because again, there's not a store you can ask. You can't ask for a, Amazon Prime package of new bearings to come out to you by any means. So there was some definite mental stress points, those, of course, those extra ones, but then just being separated from your family out there for that long was very stressful as well.
Well, and also having been in the Navy, I know being in a confined space with people and being sleep deprived and all of that. What was it like with what you can share? Let's put it that way. I can only imagine that it got tense at times between the three of you. So, what was that like?
I'll share this, and the guys know I share this. We all talk about it. One thing is we're all still friends. We got done with this row and we always said that, we learned from other people as well. The important thing is you get done with this and you're all still friends. There's no reason this needs to create any animosity between anybody, for this. And a very stressful situation. And I'll be honest, I always was concerned about the other two guys. I thought there was going to be some major, tension issues and stress, and people get sleep deprived and on edge. And really one of the biggest blow-ups, and I talk about this in my presentations, was with me, and one of the guys, and here's why the navigation. Now, one of the things I learned, and there's so many lessons to take out of this trip, Mike, and this whole journey, not just the row, but the whole journey. But one of the lessons I learned, as a team leader, is I've got to put some other responsibility on my guys and not try to take it all myself. They used to tease, if you go overboard, how to run everything, the navigation system and the water maker, we're screwed if you go overboard. And And well, I mean, they would have figured it out, obviously, but there was some truth to that. They just, hadn't dove into those, and I hadn't forced them to dive into it as much because I just thought, hey, I'm the skipper. I'm going to learn this inside and out. So when it came to navigation, and you're rowing, the wind is wanting to push us south. We kept having this issue where the wind was wanting to push us south, and so to do that in a rowboat, or anything, you've got to kind of face towards the wind a little bit, so we're trying to row due west, but the wind's pushing us south. So we're really rowing northwest, right? We're kind of crabbing along. We're going just enough north that we're counteracting the wind, but we're still making westward movement. And it was really frustrating to the guys. And part of it was how I would come out of my cabin on the break because I had the chart plotter in my cabin. I could see where we were going and how much the wind was pushing us. And I'd either come out and I'd say, hey, we need to go more north. Well, the guys knew we needed to go west. But here I am saying we need to go more north. And they're like, we don't want to go north. Home is west. We don't want to go north. And I did an awful job of explaining it, and they did an awful job of understanding the system before. And that really was our biggest kind of blow up in the end of like, because we were talking almost, I guess, a different language, if you will, had different thoughts of what we were wanting, and we just weren't aligned on our conversation. And that ended up being the biggest stress until, it passed. Guys got it. They figured it out. To this day, Jared will laugh and say, like, he's like, I just gave up because I couldn't understand it. I couldn't figure it out there. And, even in our minds, we had this thought, if you look at the race course, when we left the Canary Islands, you kind of go south. And then it's like there's this turn where you then start going west. But it's not a turn. It's this long sweeping motion, if you will. And so just, these things, that big of a scale, 3,000 miles, and you're looking at a line across an ocean on a map from previous years and thinking, okay, well, I got to turn west there. And when you get out there, you realize this is totally different. This is the wind is kind of pushing us south. And so as we start going west, we make this big sweep. But that was probably the biggest blow up. There was little things here and there. You get frustrated with people, but we came up with a team agreement before we left. And I think, for the most part, as much as you can in a stressful environment, we kept it. And, part of that was, help each other and be forgiving. And we knew out there, like, we're going to make mistakes. And I'm going to not follow, we had other stuff on there as well. Like take care of yourself and clean up your gear, keep your stuff tidy and take care of your responsibilities. But in a situation like that, you're going to fail. We're going to fall short. And so that's why it's so important. Like, hey, give 100%, but be forgiving as well, because we're all going to fall short of this. And so that was really important to have.
Yeah, it really is. And that's under the best of conditions and when you're able to get even more sleep. So it's amazing to me that you guys went that far and that long without killing each other. That's quite a feat in and of itself. Now, the race itself, because it was a race, right? Well, how did that work out? Because I know you had some crews that were there that were very, very experienced, and of course you had some teams that had more people than others, and and then you talked about the solo folks. So how did the race? How did that break down?
So here's something that was really a bunch of cops don't want to hear this in the middle of the ocean. I'll tell you what that is. So we started out December 12th is when we left, and right away we got into a really good position, and we were like, for trios, we're tracking ourselves against the other trios. We're in like second and third place for the trios. Now there's 44 teams racing, or 44 boats racing, and we were definitely in the front half. And then as time goes on, we're pretty excited. Like that makes us feel good. We'd talk to home or get a message like, hey, you guys are second or you're third or whatever in trios, and made us feel pretty good. Well, then as time started going on, boats started passing us. And I remember we had what's called a weather router. So we had a guy on land back in Florida who was tracking us very closely and tracking the weather patterns. He's an experienced rower himself, and tracking the weather patterns and the currents. And there's all these different apps you can use to track this. And we'd talk to him pretty regularly, and he'd say, hey, you guys got some weather coming in, try to get as far west as you can, or go south, like you need to go south. And I remember him calling him up because boats are starting to pass us. And we're kind of getting a little bit down. It's like, it's kind of frustrating. And funny because the guys, each of us are calling our wives and talking to our wives pretty much daily. And some of them are telling them like, oh, you're in this position or this boat passed you. And I found that eventually very stressful. And I'm like, I don't want to hear it. I told my wife, don't tell me where we're at. I just want to row. But you still hear about it, And I called the weather or weather router when I was talking to him. His name's Paul, great guy. And I said, and Paul's a veteran who also rowed the previous year for veteran suicide. And so really passionate about the same topic. But I said, Paul, like, what are these? Get us in those winds and those currents that these other boats are in because they're kicking our butts and they're going by. He says, brother, you're in the same winds and the same currents. It's your output. And when I tell you 3 cops don't want to hear somebody say it's your output, a bunch of type A personalities say you're being a bunch of wimps. It's your output. And I remember thinking, oh, great. I got to tell this to the guys now. So I tell the guys, I give it a little bit away for the right moment. And I say, guys, I talked to Paul. He says, we're in the same weather and winds. Nothing's different. It's our output. And, nobody's like, oh, whatever. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And we're not going to listen to that. There's got to be a different current, a different wind. And Mike, it was, maybe a little more than halfway through the race, we got passed by a solo rower. And he came close enough to us. We didn't really see any other boats. One time, other than the start, the first day or two, the first day and night, you see other boats. And then, you really quickly spread out. And one other time, a couple weeks in, we saw one boat just, briefly, because you'd both be up on top of a wave and you'd see the boat. And then I think I saw it twice and they were gone. But this solo rower came close enough that we could actually talk to him on the VHF radio. And I remember getting on the radio and saying, like, what are you doing, man? Like, are you not sleeping or what? Like, you're an animal. He's like, I just want to get home. And so I'm rowing my heart out. And sure enough, after he passed us, and I remember all the guys, we all kind of looked at each other like, yeah, Paul was right. It was our output. So when I talk about this being a humbling trip, when you have, a solo rower pass you. Now, granted, we were never racing. We never set out to win. We always said, well, not always. Our time extended, but, towards the end, before we left for the row, we were going to be happy with 45 to 50 days. It took us 51 days. So we were just outside of what we initially planned. But like I said, we made it back friends. Sure, the winners did it in, I think, 31 days. There was another solo rower who took, I think, 119 days.
Whoa!
To finish. And there was actually 2 solo rowers that took quite a long time to come in, like the longest the race I think has ever seen. But it's a different experience for everybody and a different goal for everybody. And we know there was 3. I'll tell you this: there was 3 American teams the year we rowed. Our team, which was called Team Guardian. After our nonprofit Guardian Initiatives, there was a team of veterans of special forces guys, and their team name was Shut Up and Row, and they did really well. They were in the 30s, somewhere in the 30s on how many days they finished. And there was another team called Fight or Die, and Fight or Die was another military team. And Fight or Die had to get rescued. Their boat actually capsized in the middle of the night. It's a different style than our boat. These boats are designed to self-right, but theirs didn't self-right. And they had quite a harrowing ordeal. They spent, I think, 36 hours in a life raft waiting to get rescued. A cargo ship picked them up. They have guys with injuries. This happened in the middle of the night, in the middle of the dark. They struggled getting their life raft out. Once they got it out, accidentally, one of the guys dropped a knife they had used to cut the tether to the main boat, because you want to try to stay attached to your main boat because that's where all your supplies are. Yeah. But they had to cut it because the waves were pushing them into it. Well, they dropped the knife and it punctured one of the chambers in their raft. And they got, like I said, picked up by a Ukrainian cargo ship. And that sound, I mean, just listening to their story later on, that was its own harrowing ordeal for that. Trying to, you're on a life raft at ocean level, trying to climb onto 1,000-foot cargo ship on a rope ladder in the, in season. The sea we never experienced super rough weather. We had some rough days. I'd say we probably had swells in the 20 to 30 feet range, but that's still a lot when you're at water level, bouncing up and down like that. That's a big sea, even if it doesn't feel like it to a big ship. It's quite a big sea.
No, it is. It absolutely is. I'm profoundly amazed that you guys do this, because I know from being out in the ocean, again, on bigger ships, what it's like. Hell, when I've been on helicopter carriers, amphibious ships, large ships, you're still getting thrown around quite a bit. So I can't even imagine. I mean, what a brave thing to do. Now, let me ask you, so these folks capsized and got rescued, but in the history of this race, have they lost anybody? Has that happened?
Yeah, they have. They actually it was after we rode. It was last year, I believe. They had a rower on the team have a heart attack.
Oh my goodness!
There. Now that's just this race. There have been ocean rowers who have died. Actually, it's funny enough. I was reading an article last night about a few back in, I think it's 2017, and was swept off the boat. Now, one critical piece. And I talked about our team agreement that we had. The number one thing in our team agreement was you always stay clipped in. And you always stayed clipped into the boat. You were always tethered to that boat. And people that die ocean rowing, oftentimes are not tethered to the boat and they get swept off. And the currents are moving fast enough and the winds there's enough of the boat above water that you become quickly separated from the boat. And even rowing, you can't row back in those winds, so you always stay tethered in. And I'll be honest, Mike, there were times we took waves that would knock us on they take on our beams on sideways, and it would push the boat over probably about a 45-degree angle, knock you off your seat and throw you into the safety. We have these safety rails, they're webbing, so you didn't get hurt, but like these safety rails on the sides of the boat. But I was never scared on the boat in that respect. I mean, we're always tethered in, always. But we never even wore life jackets ever. And I don't say that in a macho way. I normally pair that with talking about how scared I was when I was watching, my wife on the shore as we were leaving out. But our boat was very stable in the water. It's a very well designed boat. But it was very stable, which was nice. But this team that got rescued, we heard about it when we were out at sea. We were happy to hear, they were all rescued safely, and I'm still friends with some of them and talk to them pretty regularly. So that's good.
Did you happen to see any big fish or sharks or anything like that when you were out there?
We did. So we had whales early on. We had whales. We have some video of it. We had whales come right up next to the boat. Big whales come right up next to the boat. I mean, Mike, they were so close. We lifted our oars so they wouldn't hit our oars.
Holy cow.
And I remember him come inside and looking us, and the whale is looking at us. You see his big eye looking at us, and they played for about 2 hours. They hung around us, and they would swim all around the boat, and then they would go in the waves, and you could watch them playing in the water, just shooting, like going really fast in the waves. And then they'd come back and swim around us. We saw dolphin. We saw a couple shark. Marlin are really a threat out there because they'll pierce the boat. And we saw quite a few marlin come right up to the boat. None of them ever pierced our boat, but there were a couple marlin, or I think one marlin strike on one of the rudders on a boat when the year we rode, not our boat, but another team. And what else? Birds. So funny enough, and I don't know where I got this idea, maybe it's in Hollywood or something, that you would only see birds close to shore. But that's not the truth. There are birds throughout the entire ocean. There were birds. Small birds, like little tiny birds you'd see, big birds flying around. And as you got closer to land, you saw more, and they got more exotic looking. I remember some very large birds around Antigua. I don't know what they were. They looked like giant dinosaurs, but Maybe that was a hallucination we were having, but so birds throughout the entire trip, and then fish. We saw different fish. There's flying fish, which really they'd land on the deck at night. We had a couple navigation lights, low dim navigation lights on the boat at night, and they were attracted to that. They'd jump on the boat at night, and you'd find them in the morning, and they throw them off. But so we saw that kind of wildlife, and then ships. We saw probably 10 ships, 10 different ships at different points. A lot of those were big cargo ships. And it's funny, Mike, because about half of those our AIS system told us we were on a collision course with. And I thought, this is crazy. Like, we're in the middle of nowhere in the ocean, and we are on a collision course. Our 26-foot rowboat's on a collision course with a 1,000-foot, cargo ship. And so you'd get on the radio and tell them, hey, who we are, and let them know we can't maneuver. And they're all very cool with it. They'd say, okay, we see ya. And they would maneuver around us and go around. So we saw quite a few of the ships, and then some different sailboats. Saw a really massive sailboat that was on its way to Antigua as well. Looked like a giant pirate ship. We got to talk with them on the radio as well. That was pretty fun. So quite an experience. But I would like to share this. I don't know how much time we have left, but I would like to share this. There was 2 times during this trip that we had to go on what they call para anchor. It's like a giant parachute you throw out in the ocean. And what it does is when the wind is blowing, it got blowing so hard we couldn't row against the wind. Like, we were just going too far off course. And so what you do is you throw this parachute out, and it goes way out. It's like a 300-foot line. It goes out, and it's attached to the boat, and it basically keeps the wind from pushing you. You can't row when you're out on para anchor. You can't really row. And so you just are basically stopped for a while, and that keeps you from going too far off course. Solo rowers have to use them all the time when they stop and take a break. If they're going to go to bed for a few hours, they'll throw the para anchor out, or else you'll just drift, and who knows where you're going to drift. Never the direction you want to go. So the first time we went on para anchor, the winds were really hard pushing us south, and it was kind of maybe about a third of the way through the trip. Well, the second time we went on para anchor was towards the end, and our family was in Antigua waiting for us, and the winds were pushing us so far south, and you really were trying to thread a needle in where we're coming in to Antigua. We don't want to get too far south because we couldn't row back north. And so we had to make the decision, and we went on para anchor, and you're basically stopped in the ocean. And I remember the despair. Like, I told Mike and Jared, like, you guys sleep, I'll stay out here on deck, and I cleaned up. But I remember the feeling of despair out there. Like, you are so ready to be done. You are so close, and yet you're stopped and you can't go anywhere. And I was basically in tears out on deck. I'm out there by myself, just really, really upset and sad because I want to get home. I'm missing my family. The guys that were under a lot of stress. We've been passed by all these boats and to get there. But it really, and the reason I bring that up, Mike, is it really just brought home, for me, even at the moment, it brought home why we were out there doing this. And, we always talked about it was never a 1-for-1, right? Mental wellness of first responders and rowing in ocean is not a 1-to-1. But we thought how, often people that struggle and people you've spoken with or, in what we've experienced of this feeling of hopelessness, and there's nothing around you. Every day looks the same. Every day when we woke up and got on the oars, it looked the same. Bare ocean. Like, we're working our butts off, trying our hardest, doing the best we think we can, and yet it looks like we weren't making any ground, but we were. But it really just drove that home for me, and reminded me of why we were doing what we were doing, and that kind of invigorates you. It brings it back. Like, there's a lot of people actually struggling who didn't have a choice to be where they are, and that's what we're out here doing this for, are those folks.
Yeah, it is. And I tell you what, in the remaining few minutes that we have, just remind everybody again what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how they can reach out if they want to find out more information about your initiative, because it is so important. Because it's a fascinating story, and it's somewhere in there. I think you have a book. I think you should write a book about this whole thing if you haven't already started. But before we get into that, let me ask you: would you do it again?
That's a loaded question, Mike.
Yeah.
I have two answers for that. The first answer is yes, I would do it again. The second answer is no, because I told my wife I would not do it again, and she will remind me of multiple phone calls I've made to her in the middle of the night, when I was on my break, saying, "Why did you let me do this? Why weren't you like Mike's wife and said no? Why did you let me do this?" And so when I came home, I promised her I wouldn't do it again, which keeps me, I'm holding to that promise because, my personality, a lot of people, coming back, oftentimes you forget so much of the misery and the things that hurt the most, and you remember the good times and the challenge, and you want to try it again. So yeah, it's a loaded question. Yes and no. So, well,
it's kind of like, running that marathon about mile 18. You're like, why the hell did I do this? And once you get in the car, before you get home, you're already planning the next one. I think it's kind of the same thing. But you have kind of a history of doing some extreme things too, right? Mountain climbing and other types of ventures. So this is not new. I mean, the adventure stuff is not new to you.
I did do this last summer. I did a 24-hour mountain bike race in New Mexico. And I must say, doing that for 24 hours was a lot easier than 51 days, staying up, sleep deprived. And so much of it reminded me of the row. We were on a team on a relay, and, waking up in the middle of the night, you're soaking wet from, your clothes are wet from your previous lap, and your shoes are wet from it raining, and getting on the mountain bike and on the row, I remember that you get up in the middle of the night, you put your shoes on, which you left your shoes on deck, and they're cold and wet. And I put this mountain bike race, I put my shoes on in the middle of the night, and they're cold and wet. And I thought, this is flashbacks to the row. But one day of pain was a lot nicer than 51 days of pain. So
I bet.
But yeah, no, you asked, on the, the whole reason, again, the reason we did the row was to raise awareness for first responder mental wellness and suicide prevention, for our law enforcement, for our fire EMTs, our, dispatchers, our, even the corrections guys. I don't want to leave our corrections folks out. I know they're not out responding to calls for service, but they're handling and dealing with situations that most people never would want to deal with. So even our corrections and our, jailers, our whole goal was to raise awareness for it. We did a great job in doing that, and we were able to raise a bunch of money. We sold our boat. We came back. We sold our boat. We were able to put all that money right back into our nonprofit Guardian Initiatives, and have since been able to continue. The nonprofit's still around. We're working with some different clinicians. We've been able to provide treatment money, some support for different folks that, took the step, got treatment. There were some ancillary costs to them, and we were able to help them by giving them funding to cover those costs. We're working now to increase our resources. And so we have a website. It's called row3000.com, ROW, then 3000.com. And, we're going to be posting on there more resources. We're in the process of changing a few things up, but our board has been working hard to increase that resource list and start really sharing out. And while a lot of it is focused on our Four Corners area, the resources aren't just Four Corners specific. We have resources from around the country to help with first responders. Because as I said early on, there's actually a lot of resources out there to help our first responders. We just don't know about a lot of them.
Yeah, a lot of them. There are a lot of resources out there, and I think it's just a matter of advertising it, and through things like what we're doing right here on this podcast. Getting that word out to the different programs that are out there. But there's more coming down the pike, and we all do what we can. So, what is the website? If people want to get hold of you, how do they do that?
It's www.row3000.com, ROW300.com. We made it as easy as we could. And row3000.com, there's a contact form on there. You can reach out. That comes right to Jared and I. If there's anything, and under our resources page, we have a spot on our resources page that if you have a resource you'd like for us to include on there, you can actually submit it, and we can include our that as a resource. Our board has to approve it, but then we can include that as a resource.
Well, outstanding. Mark, great work that you're doing here, and thanks again for coming back on the podcast, and looking forward to your next adventure and the work that you're doing. We gotta connect back in person again. You're way out there in New Mexico, and I'm in Virginia, just outside DC, but we got to get together soon. It's been a little while.
Right, we should, for sure. It's always great to catch up, and Mike, I appreciate all the work you do to continue to help the first responder. I know you, like me, you're retired from that profession now, but still working hard to help the profession. So I appreciate that. Absolutely. Well, take care, and we'll talk with you soon. Sounds great, Mike. Thanks, you too. All right, guys. So thanks again. That's Mark Pfetzer with Guardian Initiatives, and the website is row3000.com. And you guys take care of yourselves, and we will be talking with all of you soon. Recovery is possible. You just keep at it, and we'll be talking soon.